In 30 years, she has gone from someone who felt like the only Asian female in the auto industry to someone who advocates for diversity, female empowerment, and breaking down boundaries in the industry.
I'd just gotten my MBA in International Business and Finance from NYU, and I got a job in the proprietary trading division of a French bank. Being the only woman there, I was treated differently.
He threw his file at me and said, "Girl, build this out." I ripped it up in tiny little pieces in front of everybody and said, "You made a mistake. This was the one way that I was going to get some respect."
Whenever the phone rang, people would say, "Liz, phone." And then I was asked to make sure the supply closet was stocked. And this was on top of my regular responsibilities. And I thought, if I want to be successful in business, I think I'm going to need to create the environment myself.
I don't tolerate any sort of nonsense in any of my stores. And if you tolerate that on any level, your people realize that you're not going to protect them. And it's your job.
I got told a lot, because you're a girl, you can't do that. Whenever somebody tells me you can't go through that door, I'm gonna tell them, watch me do it.
When I was at my other agency, I really tried to put my foot down and tried to speak up for myself, and I just felt never heard.
Working in tech and in anything that's dominated by male leadership, I've always felt that if there's a chance where it's one against one and it's me and another man, it's always gonna be him that gets the take. But I think that's changing.
We need to rally with each other, support each other.
What's it gonna hurt you to help build someone up? It's only gonna build you up, make you stronger, help propel the world forward.
By working with such amazing women and strong women, it's just inspirational, and there's no fear.
Women in power is economic power, is social power, and social power is political power, and this is how we change the world and make it a better place.
For me, the most important thing is to make sure that this doesn't happen in my daughter's generation. Don't let anybody make you feel less than who you really are. I will always support how you walk away.
Speak up, say you're uncomfortable, end the meeting, walk out of the room, get out of the car. You need to set the tone. You get to have your voice.
Stand back, stand out, and be a leader and try to change things.
Let your voice be heard. We need to stick together, because there aren't too many of us, but hopefully in the future, we'll take over.
From New York City, please welcome Diana Lee.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I thought I could just share with you a little personal story of mine, because my journey has been very different from many people, I'm sure, in this room, but I wanted to share actually what happened to me. So my family immigrated here in 1974. My father had $2,000 in his pocket. He didn't have a job. My mother didn't have a job. They only had a dream. And the dream really was they wanted to come to the land of opportunity, which was America. So they saved all the money that they had after the Korean War, and they moved here to the US. I was really small, though. So that's me in front of my whole peers. And my father always worried, I was really small, and he wanted us to do really well in school. So he would work 15-hour days, he'd get home, and he was a mathematician, an engineer, and he would say, okay, let's do some math lessons. And I would really try at 5 years old to be good at math. But I was like the only Asian person in the world that couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Dad used to worry about me, and he'd go around telling everybody, you have to take care of my daughter. No matter what, you have to take care of my daughter. She's really small. She can't do math. She's not going to survive. So he'd go around, he's like, promise me to my mom, take care of my daughter. Promise me to my sister, take care of my daughter, my relatives. And during that time, all I remember, at 5 years old, there's still a little fire inside me that said, I'll show him. And that was really the start. So my father didn't call, he used to call me Little Flower. That was my little nickname for him. But in my mind, I was not a little flower. So roll to 1989. I'm 18 years old. And I go through a local paper. I'm actually at university now. I'm a freshman year, going into sophomore year, summertime. I need a job. I go through the local paper, and there's an ad. And the ad is for a greeter at a local Toyota dealership. I apply, I get the job. 2 weeks later, so many of you guys have been in retail, things change really quickly. 2 weeks later, there's too many ups in the showroom on a Saturday, and suddenly they go, you know what, you're not a greeter anymore, you're a salesperson now. You're gonna start selling cars. And I have to figure it out. It was really terrifying in a lot of ways. Men that were double my age, but I had to sell. And I did. I did the whole summer selling vehicles. And I did well. So well that they basically said, hey, you know what? You can stay on. And I was like, I'm going back to school. I'm not staying in retail automotive. There's no way. They said, you know what? We will work your schedule. You can work 2 to 9 every day and go to school from 9 in the morning to 2. And it was a gift for me back then because I couldn't afford the school that I was in. I couldn't afford my lifestyle, and my parents were paying and taking student loans on my behalf. So I took the deal. I worked 2 to 9 every day. I worked Saturdays and I worked Sundays. And I finished school. And at that time, I thought it was a phenomenal experience, but it was super hard too, to work in retail automotive back in the 80s and 90s for the Toyota dealership. But best of all, I drove this on campus. A hot Toyota Celica. I got to drive the hottest car through campus, and everybody knew who I was. But it wasn't always that easy to stay in retail automotive. I had to actually fight. And retail automotive, I'll tell you, it's like street fighting. And I became a professional street fighter. I got good at it. And I moved up. Shortly after finishing college, I became a finance manager. And when I talk about the video about ripping up the folder, what happened was it was my first job as a finance manager at a new dealership. A salesperson came to me. He threw the file at me and said, girl, build this out. All I knew back then, the little raging fire, grabbed the folder, ran outside, and I'm new at this dealership, but I ripped that folder up in tiny little pieces in front of everybody. I didn't care if I was fired or not. And I said, you made a mistake. Start over. Walked right back into my office. And you know what? I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to know that I was the alpha. I wanted every salesperson to know that I was going to manage them because I look like this. Rolled to many more years, and I stayed in retail for quite some time. But soon as I had gotten married and had my own children, I realized I couldn't do the hours anymore. I went into automotive consulting. And the OEMs hired me. It was great. I had the best experiences with some of the biggest OEM makers around the world. And that was another 15 years of automotive consulting. But then, 3 years ago, my husband,
says to me, "You're never going to do it. You're never, ever, ever going to do it." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're 47 now. And you said that you wanted to start something. And you always talk about how you're going to make it bigger, better, stronger, faster. But this is towards the end of your career. So if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it." So I realized, wow, I got to take a risk. And 3 years ago, May of 2016, we launched Constellation Agency. And in that risk, some of the biggest OEMs joined on at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. In 3 years, we worked with over 600 franchises across the country. But still, with all this success, and I have to tell you, in 3 years, we're projected to hit $25 million in revenue this year. Taking that risk. But as much as I was proud of our agency and what we had done, there was still something that was wrong. And it was this: we work with the brightest and best millennials out there. We're in New York City. We pull from the top universities: Dartmouth, Columbia, Cornell, NYU. They are the best and strongest and brightest millennials out there in automotive. And still, with this, I realized we had issues at the agency. Around year 2, I had noticed that the men in our organization would ask me for things all the time. Whether it was for promotions, for raises, for time off, for PTO, whatever it was, they asked for it. Not only did they ask for it, they demanded it. They made it so uncomfortable at times if I had to say no. They would have advocates around them telling me that they deserved it. It wasn't easy. I would have to bring in my team to actually help me with some of the conversations that I would have with them. But when I looked at the females, and our agency was 60% female, they don't ask me for anything. It was a problem I noticed early on, year 2. So I took the women in our organization into a conference room. I told them to look outside. And I asked them, guess how many of those men asked me for things in the last 2 years? They looked at each other, and the answer was 50%. 50% of the men by year 2 asked me for something. And I asked all of them in the room, how many of you asked me for anything in the last 2 years? The answer was 1. 1. And I knew there was an issue. I certainly don't want anybody to ask me for stuff, but I still knew that this was a situation that was far greater than just Constellation Agency. I needed them to feel like it was okay for them to advocate for themselves, that they deserved it. And like me, I wanted them to fight for it. It had to come from somewhere. So I had that conversation. And I told them the lessons that I learned in the last 30 years of working in this industry. Lesson number 1 was you can't ask for anything if you don't believe that you deserve it. And if you believe that you deserve it, you have to love yourself enough to ask for it. So for me, lesson number 1 is self-love, right? You're not going to ask for it if you don't love yourself. If you don't feel like you deserve it, you're never going to ask for it. This was really important in the self-love journey for me, which is the funny thing is when you start feeling happy alone, that's when everyone decides to be with you, right? In the age of social media, when we all want likes and validations from everybody else, that's not what's important. You have to be okay with you. And so I told them, what's important is that you love yourself. The second lesson was this: advocates. I couldn't have gotten here without advocates. I couldn't have gotten here without my husband, who told me, jump, and I've got you. No matter what, you'll be okay. My partner, who's here right now with me, Matt Woodruff, he was at Ogilvy and Mathers in New York City running social labs. And I had to convince him to come and join me. He was probably looking at me like, crazy Asian woman, go away, right? But he believed, and he jumped, and he came for the ride. Matt Morris, who's also here with us, he's my chief revenue officer, he was at a $1 billion translations company. He came over. And this part I'm super proud of as well. The 3 OEMs that gave us chances, marketing managers, so it was Natalie Carpenter, Hillary Grace, and Maria Tobia. They were all female. And it's amazing. We all need the male and female advocates around us. And I've had so many more in this journey. But without them, I couldn't have gotten here. And the last lesson was really this. Abby Wambach is one of my favorite speakers, and she's a great soccer player out there. And she did recently a commencement speech at a university. And she said, as women, we're taught to be like Little Red Riding Hood. Right? Keep your head down, follow direction, be nice, do what you're told to do. But remember, my father used to call me Little Flower, but the car business, my colleagues, they called me Iron Butterfly. So what I'm saying to you today is don't be like Little Red Riding Hood. We all have to be like the wolf. Thank you.
I loved your reference to Abby Wambach's Wolfpack Barnard commencement speech.
Yes.
It was delivered a year ago this week. Really, I'm not obsessed with it. Her powerful words capture the spirit of Automotive News Leading Women Network. Abby told women to champion each other. She said, as you go out into the world, amplify each other's voices. Demand seats for women, people of color, and all marginalized people at every table where decisions are made. Diana, you took your female employees into a room and demanded they speak up like your male employees did routinely. Outside of a get in this room now meeting, how can we encourage women to be the wolf?
I think it's really important to take a lot of risks out there. I think women these days, we're not taking enough. We're always a little bit afraid. And I think it's really important that even if you think that it's not going to work out, to take that risk. Because I will tell you that the automotive industry gave me more gifts than I ever imagined. You know, it gave me the power to even send my family to vacations and things that I never thought I could do. But with the power of some risk-taking and the belief in myself, I think I was able to trail ahead. And I feel like we need to do that for each other.
How has your culture influenced where you are today?
Wow. So, you know, for me, I came from a situation where my family was so poor. And so after the Korean War, most of the people in Korea didn't have anything. So they all wanted to live in the US. And so when we came over, I would think that one thing that I learned from that environment where I came from was that you couldn't do anything without working super hard. And so I watched my family do it. They got us out of the ghettos and got us into pretty nice housing after a certain point in time. My parents always provided enough money so I can go into private schools. And so education was super important. And then just making sure that, we still remained a very tight family unit with all the different situations that were happening around us. It also allowed me to grow up really quickly because my parents couldn't speak the language. So I was the translator at home, and in doing that, you grow up fairly quickly. You end up having to redo their mortgages and buy them their cars, and you just have to grow up and negotiate a lot of those things for them. So those are the things that I learned from just coming from a Korean immigrant culture.
And did you ever learn math?
I was a finance manager, okay? Just want to point that out.
Well done.
I conquered.
How do you engage new female leaders and mentor them towards success?
I think it's really important to have conversations with them, but also talk about your vulnerabilities. So I'm a certified coach, and I have to tell you that it's been a struggle doing a startup. All the things that you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to say and how you're supposed to act. But when you're surviving, all that goes out the window. And it's the horror monster comes out. But I tell them, a lot of times what I do is I say I'm sorry because I know I've gone too far. And my two mats reel me in. They're like, what are you doing? How could you say that? Stop it. So it's a lot of life lessons and learning, but also really owning up to the mistakes that I've made and also mentoring people. Because you can make mistakes, but you can also recover from those mistakes.
Let's get into some Brené Brown stuff. You've said women have to have enough confidence to take the risks, to find the advocates, to ask for the promotion. Where are we supposed to get this self-confidence?
I think from within. I think we all have it. But I think it's you gotta practice it, right? But you get better at it as you test yourself. But if you never practice it, it never gets any better.
Here's a quote from you that I came across. The payoff for companies who support women can be significant. It's the right thing to do, and it makes business sense. Of course, everyone in this room and around the country listening to us on the live stream agrees with that. My question is, why are we still having to press to make it happen?
I think it's not just one situation. I think it's multifaceted, right? I think there's a lot of women. We don't throw ourselves out there. I think because we don't throw ourselves out there, I don't think that they even look at us as a part of an opportunity for promotion or raises. So I think that's one situation. I also think in the automotive industry, there's just a lot of men, and they are aggressive, right? They know they deserve it. They want it. And so they're gonna go for it no matter what. So I think it's a combination of women not going out and taking the lead and men thinking they can take the lead, and they do.
How do you start the conversation about asking for equal or better pay if you don't know the situation because there's a lack of income transparency?
So I think a lot of reasons why we don't do something is because of fear. I can say there are so many ways and so many things that will come in your head that will make you afraid to ask for anything. You can think about all the things that can go wrong in the conversation. But at the end, if you think of all the obstacles first, you're never going to actually take that risk. So I'm saying don't think about it. Just ask. Do the first step. It's just like what I told my employees. I'll be proud of you just because you did it. I can't grant every wish out there, but I will be super proud if you did it. And what I'm saying is they might be not super proud of you, but you be super proud of you. Just do it.
Men have helped you in your career more than women. Is that just because there are more of them, or why is that?
It's just a lot more of them. And I think that's true. So there are a few women that actually help me, but there's just a lot more men.
How do you walk the line of being the wolf without it having the perception of it being at the expense of others?
At the expense of others. So for me, to be the wolf meant a lot about not just speaking up for myself, but speaking up for everybody around me, right? So it was also about advocating for everybody else. So for me, I think that's really important to remember that you're not the only one that needs this. It's all of us in the room. And if you don't take this step, the next person's afraid to take that next step. So I'm saying that it's not about me most of the time. It's about all of us.
Your story is inspiring, says an audience member, and I also agree. Why did you name your company Constellation? Any significance?
Okay, so my partner was driving me crazy with names. He had a naming convention happening at Ogilvy where he hired copywriters to come in. And we were thinking about all different names for Constellation, and we couldn't agree on anything. But the one thing is, we're a digital media agency. A lot of what we do is in the area of social media. We hear a lot of times people say, I do social. They don't really do social. Social takes strategy to do for business. And so for us, Constellation is connecting the dots to a real strategy instead of just, I do social. So that's where Constellation came from.
Thanks for all you shared today, Diana.
Thank you.